All right, so let's move to the House and talk about this sort of this fight that has broken out in the House. And to me, which keeps like sort of striking me is this is exactly what we saw in 2018, where the first month of a democratically controlled Congress was ostensibly dedicated to passing HR1, which was actually a pretty good bill in terms of voting rights, in terms of like ethics, in terms of anti-corruption,
public financing, even
public financing,
matching funds for candidates. Yeah,
it was a great bill that nobody heard of because Nancy Pelosi joined in on attacks on Ilhan Omar. And you go back, like literally on the day that they had passed that, the top story was about Ilhan Omar. And we're seeing this over again. They're doing it again. They launch into an attack on a. What will you tell the story of this phone call that was? And I wonder, you know, I'm always very suspicious about things that like we never meant for this to get out, even though we had a half a dozen reporters on the phone at the time. Will you tell that story?
Well, the reporters weren't exactly on the phone, but right. So it's, you know, they used to have caucus meetings in, you know, and soon they'll again be having some caucus meetings indoors, maybe masked up. But the way that the caucus has been meeting privately is over conference call, and some staff call into these conference calls as well. Although even before it moved to a Zoom conference calls, you were having a lot of members who would text reporters in real time. You know, this is what so-and-so just said. This is what this person just said. Because this one went on for 3 hours, it became kind of a public spectacle. And because it actually mattered and people were really pouring their hearts out, that you started hearing that centrist after centrist, you know, with Abigail Spanberger kind of being the most florid in her denunciations, were coming to the microphone, or I guess pressing *1 or whatever, to be able to unburden themselves about the burden that progressivism and what they called socialism, you know, had brought to their campaign, saying that, you know, that because of words like Medicare for all and socialism and defund the police, but they lost a lot of very good members, and they have to stop this right now. And, you know, it's childish and it's unprofessional, it's irresponsible. And you had Rashida Tlaib push back and say, look, we don't know yet. You're launching into this analysis without any of the data. But what we do know is that in precincts like hers and like Ilhan Omar's, you know, turnout climbed in substantial ways, and that, you know, without voters in Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Detroit, Joe Biden doesn't win, you know, Pennsylvania, right, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And so maybe while there's still these Georgia Senate specials that are still to be decided, let's not thoroughly trash the progressive wing of the party just yet. So that kicked off this civil war, or this new battle in the Civil War. AOC then responded with an interview in the New York Times, and then she was blamed for kind of launching the war, even though it was in response to the letter, to the call.
But her response, it seems to me, I mean, because I don't know, was there any candidates that were running on, on a defund the police slogan? I mean, there's obviously this is
no, and actually, so I actually talked to some Republican campaigners about this, and they said the only district where they seriously went in on defund the police was Anthony Brindisi's, because they said he has more of a Trump kind of culturally conservative district where that message would resonate. Whereas
where's Brindisi's? Where is Brindisi?
He's outside New York somewhere, right? Like up in upstate New York, kind of Trumpish area that Democrats flipped in 2018. And so all of the other ones, they studied it hard. They wanted to hit Democrats with the best shot they could. Defund the police wasn't really what was resonating. What they did instead was they support, the law and order, the Trump message of like the Portland chaos is going to come to you. You're not going to be safe in your neighborhoods. Democrats just aren't going to protect you. So it wasn't really around defund the police, and those candidates weren't running on defund the police. Defund the police is a slogan. I think it's not a great slogan. It's a slogan that came from the ground up from protests. And so what are centrist Democrats saying? Like we can't have protests anymore. Protesters can't have signs.
All right. We should say also there seems to be major construction going on in your house right now. So I don't want anybody to I don't want one of those things like, how come nobody notices that? That's all right. But yes, the defund it does feel like they're complaining about the protests, and which is for politicians. It's basically like, we're going to complain about the fact that it's raining as I'm sorry, that exists. We know the data. We know that registration went up significantly in the wake of the BLM protests. We know that at least on the presidential level, without that registration, without that surge of votes from urban centers, that you may not have a President Biden right now. And so they're looking for a scapegoat, and it seems to me. And what was interesting to me, and this is the thing that I really do appreciate about AOC, is that her response was less about adopt this ideological perspective and more about, you need to get best practices. I mean, she talked about digital space, but even Doug Jones, who lost in Alabama, had a quote in the Washington Post, I think it was, where he said the problem with the DCCC and the DSCC is that they invest in candidates. They don't invest in voters. In other words, there's no organizing going on. It is like, we've got an election 6 weeks out. Now it's time to just, pour money into the candidates. And this is what it seems to me is what AOC has been saying too. And a lot of like reformers of the Democratic Party apparatus, not necessarily from an ideological perspective, they sometimes correlate, but you can have a fight over the ideology, and you can also have a fight over the apparatus and the best practices. And it seems to me like there's a conflation. When Jim Clyburn weighs in and says, this is about defund the police and blah, 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 as opposed to, hey, how come there's no on the ground organizing? The one place that we saw it was in Georgia, right? Where there's been an apparatus. Right.
Actually, to even further buttress your point, the other place we saw it was in Arizona, because largely Latino groups there had been organizing against Sheriff Arpaio for a decade plus, and had over the past several years gotten an influx of investment nationally to kind of allow them to really build on the organizing that they'd been doing over all of those years. And so you had this community that organized for a particular political goal. They accomplished that goal, throwing Arpaio out, and in accomplishing that goal, they built political power, and they built a political constituency that had solidarity with the people that stood with them through that fight, and they were able to deliver to deliver Arizona for Biden and for Democrats. But you're right, that doesn't happen anywhere else, and there's this kind of mismatch between the way that Democrats are approaching politics and the kind of populist moment that we're in right now. And Doug Jones understands that, because he understands that there are so many of these weird voters in Alabama who they hate both leaderships of both parties and are actually persuadable between the kind of two wildly different wings of the two different parties. And, because he's been going around Alabama for so long, he has seen that. Whereas the kind of Washington Democrat approach is to say, all right, we're going to run a bunch of polls, and we're going to see which particular message, if we drop $1 million on it in the local TV network, is going to move the polling numbers 3 points over the course of the next 2 weeks. And they do that polling, and it turns out that people want their drug prices to be lower than they want them to be higher, if those are their choices. Yeah, how about that? Lower.
All right. Well,
if you need to write that down so you can remember that, people want lower drug prices. And if you have a pre-existing condition, that you are entitled to continue to live. So they poll those things, and those poll quite well. They cut those ads. They re-poll a week or two later after they've spent $1 million running these ads on TV. The people remember seeing those ads. They remember the name. The polling numbers go up. Everybody gets a cut along the way. Whether it's somewhere between 8 and 15% of whatever that media buy was, everybody's happy. You go to the polls. It turns out that didn't really sink in, because of course everybody likes low drug prices. But what else is going on, and what else does the Democratic Party represent? Who does it represent? What organizing has gone on in the community to show that this is a party that you ought to have solidarity with at the polls? And so you're right. There may be this disconnect between just the fundamental way that Democrats think they ought to campaign and the intensity of the populist moment that we're in now.
What did the argument from the moderates? I mean, on some level, there seems to be like there's sort of a bait and switch quality to this argument. It seems to me, right, where you have the more sort of like grassroots oriented and ideologically to the left Democrats, and although Doug Jones, I guess maybe relative to Alabama, he's to the left, but I mean. He's making this argument too. You need to invest in the district, not in the politician. You need to build an apparatus on the ground that exists separate from and is more durable than a certain campaign that an individual is going to run at any given time. I mean, that to me seems like a very basic message. And frankly, I mean, if I was, the squad, I would be traveling around with Doug Jones talking about that, because, apparently they can't undercut his message by saying he's so far to the left, he doesn't know what it is to run in some place outside of New York. Right. I mean, that to me seems like to be the clearest expression of somebody who understands the dynamic that's going on here. What was ostensibly the message that the moderates were running on that got stepped on? Like, what was the message? Was it just, we're going to protect your pre-existing conditions? That was the whole message?
Well, the moderate message was, I think, pretty well summed up by the Joe Biden campaign, which is that we're going to get rid of Donald Trump. We're going to restore decency, but nothing will fundamentally change. And that's the message that these moderates want. It was seen as a gaffe when Biden said that, but it wasn't. That's the message that moderates wanted to convey to a lot of the suburban voters who, they've been, they were winning over in 2018 and to lesser extent 2016, and that they were kind of banking the rise of this new Democratic Party on. And unfortunately, it feels like it worked too well.
Well, yes.
So,
I mean, yes,
if you got Biden.
Me, right, exactly. Yes. Exactly. And the Democrats did nothing to tie the Republican Party to Donald Trump. So the idea was like, I got you. You're right. We're going to get rid of Donald Trump, and nothing else will change. Nothing. I won't change anything else. I mean, they literally
keep the House as it is. Keep the Senate as it is. Yeah.
That is. I mean, that to me seems like an unbelievably short-sighted message. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, okay, it works for Joe Biden because Joe Biden's the one actually running against Donald Trump. But if you go around and you put down Republicans, you platform them at your convention, and you talk about the good Republicans, and you embrace other Republicans, and you say secretly they're telling us we don't like Donald Trump, but they won't say it publicly. Well, then how do you hope that the person you're running against for Congress is going to be tainted by Donald Trump? You've just basically given the entire script for your challenger.
Right. And so people like Katko in Syracuse, where the Democrats were running against her, or Bacon in Omaha, those are fairly popular, well-liked Republicans who, if you're sending the message that, Republicans aren't the problem is Donald Trump and bad Republicans, then it's quite reasonable for a voter in Syracuse or Omaha to say, okay, well, I actually like my guy, Representative Katko, and this Representative Bacon. He's a nice guy. I've seen him at an event. He's not like Donald Trump. And another thing that Republican operatives have said is that it's not that Democrats really tried hard to tie Trump to a lot of these Republicans, but it's also difficult to do because Trump is such a unique figure. And so you can't, you're just some boring politician is not Trump. So you have to say, well, they're Trump enablers. And, they created the conditions that allowed somebody like Trump to come into power. And so for their cowardice, for their enabling, they are therefore bad, and they need to go, whether or not they spoke at the Little League event or not. But because you said it really well, because Kasich and others spoke at the convention. These are good Republicans, then fine.
It's also not a project you can do over the course of a 3-month campaign. Like, you need to start this 4 years ago. You need to start this 4 years ago, where you tie Donald Trump to the Republicans, and the Democrats have refused in a virulent way to do that. They
aggressively wanted to go the other way because they wanted to be validated by all of these never Trump Republicans and have their view that Trump is somebody different, and that there are good Republicans. MSNBC is, no offense to Peacock, has a ton of Republicans who tell the MSNBC viewing audience that, look, this is these are bad Republicans, we're the good Republicans. So
without a doubt, but it's not Comcast's job to say that Republicans have enabled Donald Trump. Honestly, I'm not. If it was up to me, I wouldn't program it that way, because I'm attempting to make that point about Republicans. But the Democrats have. Because I think your assessment is true. But the Democrats, they need to do this first, right? Like, if they're not cleaving, if they're not tying Donald Trump or their local congressman to Donald Trump, or Mitch McConnell to Donald Trump, or Paul Ryan, who incidentally was one of those people who pushed this whole California voting, late votes coming in 2017. That's suspicious. There's been many opportunities to tie the Republicans to Donald Trump, and daring them, to vote against them, vote for that stimulus. Make Mitch McConnell either vote against him or not. Like, make them actually behave in the way that they're communicating. Again, it gets back to, Chris Coons basically saying, we're going to give Republicans the advantage of supporting Donald Trump when they want to, but also the advantage of them actually not really supporting Donald Trump. And so if we get rid of Donald Trump, they'll be fine. Joe Biden said this over and over and over again. He told people we need a Republican Party. And he said this during the campaign, and it helped him. Go ahead.
No, Pelosi said the exact same thing. We need a strong Republican Party. And Biden talked about having a Republican as his running mate. And everyone in the audience, when he said that, laughed, and he Chase. He was like, no. I'm not telling a joke here. I'm serious. I would love to have a Republican as my running mate. I don't think that there are any right now, that because of the current conditions, that I could put on my ticket. But I would do it. And so that, if that's the signal that you're sending to voters, then there shouldn't be any surprise at all that voters said, okay, well then we'll do Biden and a bunch of Republicans.
So are there any figures in the Democratic Party, other than, what we've heard from Tlaib and from AOC, who have this a similar perspective on what went wrong? Or are we going to just hear that it's the progressives' fault and, go through this cycle again?
Well, Schumer is the most fascinating case, because yes, he has a re-election in 2022 and would much prefer to avoid a primary challenge rather than grapple with primary challenge. At the same time, Schumer is is quite a well-known political animal. This is somebody who has spent his entire life kind of reading political tea leaves and divining what the correct direction is. And I do get the sense that he actually is aware of the realignment and the populist anger that's out there. It's not obvious that he's going to be able to be the one that can lead it. He's formerly known as Wall Street Chuck. It's not going to be easy for somebody to transition like that, but he does appear to get it. And if he gets it, there are a lot of other senators who trust his kind of political judgment. And so whether they have the capacity to not just absorb that new environment, but actually act on it is an open question at the very best. So it may be that you just need a whole new crop of leaders who get it, but it is starting to dawn on a significant number of Democrats in Washington that what the stakes are in this fight. You would have thought that November 2016 would have brought about this kind of evolution in their thinking and in their understanding of who their opposition is. It did for a few, but particularly Trump resisting the results of the election and a significant number of Republicans, or basically the entire Republican Party, going along with him publicly, has been even more of a wake up call. But like I said, if you've been doing things the same way.
I mean, how many times do you get a wake up call? It's like they keep getting the wake up call, and then they say,
it's noon now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, all right. So lastly, what about in the House? I mean, that's all well and good in the Senate, but if they don't control the Senate, then it really doesn't matter what Chuck Schumer is saying, frankly.
Right. The House is seems to be further behind in just kind of intellectually and politically in catching up with the moment. And part of it is just the nature of the institution. It's kind of like a middle school cafeteria. It has so many different cliques revolving around that cafeteria and tossing food at each other and talking about who the cool kids are and who the losers are, that it very quickly descends into that type of kind of interpersonal knife fighting, which is makes it hard to then have like a 30,000 foot analysis of where the country is headed. And even if you could have that analysis, it makes it very difficult for people to get on the same team to kind of push in that direction. Something that might be easier in a Senate where you have 48 or 50 members.
To the extent that there's any type of leadership fight, it's happening as to who's going to follow Nancy Pelosi after these 2 years.
Probably. I mean, she's going to have to work hard to lock down. With such a small majority, she can only lose a handful of votes, and so you could become Speaker of the House. Is that what you're saying? Right. Okay. Right. Because the Republicans aren't going to vote for her.
Right.
And so you need a majority, and so she's going to need people like most of the squad and people like Josh Gottheimer and the No Labels crew and the Problem Solvers Caucus. All these people that have been hostile to her. She's going to need most of them to agree to vote yes on the House floor. Is it
possible that we could see a sort of trans ideological, I don't know, attempt to maybe unseat her?
Anything's possible. You've had those. Tim Ryan kind of ran a trans ideological attempt to unseat her, and he might have been premature. He got beaten quite badly, and then kind of embarrassed himself. Pretty sure he ran for president.
Yes, he did.
Yes. So he kind of drained what capital he had with those two defeats. It really comes down to a question of who. I think the idea is a sound one, but the nature of the House is that
names?
everybody says That's the thing.
Yeah.
No, there aren't.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Your right wingers, like, so Hakeem Jeffries is kicked around. Joe Crowley would be probably speaker by now if AOC hadn't knocked him out. So it would have to be somebody like Jeffries, who enough progressives like, and is also comfortable with the right wing. But the left would probably rather have Pelosi than Jeffries.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I would rather a weak, non-ideologically lined leader at this point than a strong, supposedly ideologically aligned leader, because it sometimes comes and undercuts movements.
Anyone in that job is going to be weak, if you can only lose a few votes.
Good point.
On every vote.
Ryan Grimm, DC bureau chief for The Intercept, as always, a pleasure and very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here.